Clarke Englund, the teacher of the adult Bible class at New Braunfels Bible Church. Last week we looked at Isaiah chapter 31 and 32. And chapter 31 talked about the fifth woe against those who look to Egypt for help. In Egypt, we talked about, had been a strong nation, but they were not strong at this time. They were just the strongest nation Judah could ask for help. But we also discussed that God was the only one who could provide Judah with the protection and help that they needed. And then we looked at chapter 32, which really focused on the blessings of living under the Messiah and under living under a rule of righteousness and justice. And then it also included a warning, again, to those who were not trusting God. Let's take a moment and we will begin reading Isaiah chapter 33, and we will look at Isaiah 33 from the New King James Version. So Isaiah 33 says, "Woe to you who plunder, though you have not been plundered, and you who deal treacherously, though you have not dealt treacherously with you. When you cease plundering, you will be plundered. When you make an end of dealing treacherously, they will deal treacherously with you. O Lord, be gracious to us. We have waited for you. Be their arm every morning, our salvation also in the time of trouble. At the noise of the tumult, the people shall flee. When you lift yourself up, the nations shall be scattered, and your plunder shall be gathered, like the gathering of the caterpillar, as the running to and fro of locusts. He shall run upon them. The Lord is exalted, for he dwells on high. He has filled Zion with justice and righteousness. Wisdom and knowledge will be the stability of your times and the strength of salvation. The fear of the Lord is his treasure. Surely the valiant ones shall cry outside. The ambassadors of peace shall weep bitterly. The highways lie waste. The traveling man ceases. He has broken the covenant. He has despised the cities. He regards no man. The earth mourns and languishes. Lebanon is shamed and shriveled. Sharon is like a wilderness, and Bashan and Carmel shake off their fruits. Now I will rise, says the Lord. Now I will be exalted, and now I will lift myself up. You shall conceive chaff. You shall bring forth stubble. Your breath as fire shall devour you, and the people should be like the burnings of lime. Like thorns cut up, they should be burned in the fire. Hear, you who are far off, what I have done, and you who are near, acknowledge my might. The sinners in Zion are afraid. Fearlessness has seized the hypocrites. Who among us shall dwell with the devouring fire? Who among us shall dwell with the everlasting burnings? He who walks righteously and speaks uprightly, he who despises the gain of oppressions, who gestures with his hands, refusing bribes, who stops his ears from hearing of bloodshed and shuts his eyes from seeing evil. He will dwell on high. His place of defense will be the fortress of rocks. Bread will be given him. His water will be sure. Your eyes will see the king in his beauty. They will see the land that is very far off. Your heart will meditate on terror. Where is the scribe? Where is he who weighs? Where is he who counts the towers? You will not see a fierce people, a people of obscure speech beyond perception, of a stammering tongue that you cannot understand. Look upon Zion, the city of our appointed feasts, a tabernacle that will not be. You will see Jerusalem, a quiet home, a tabernacle that will not be taken down. Not one of its stakes will ever be removed, nor will any of its cords be broken. But there the majestic Lord will be for us, a place of broad rivers and streams in which no galley with oars will sail, nor majestic ships pass by. For the Lord is our judge, the Lord is our lawgiver, the Lord is our king. He will save us. Your tackle is loosed. They could not strengthen their mast. They could not spread the sail. Then the prey of great plunder is divided. The lame take the prey, and the inhabitant will say, I am sick. The people will dwell in it, will be forgiven their iniquity. And so I also want to read the first 4 verses out of the New Living Translation, because you can see a difference. What sorrow awaits you, Assyrians, who have destroyed others, but have never been destroyed yourselves. You betray others, but you have never been betrayed. When you are done destroying, you will be destroyed. When you are done betraying, you will be betrayed. But Lord, be merciful to us, for we have waited for you. Be our strong arm each day and our salvation in times of trouble. The enemy runs at the sound of your voice. When you stand up, the nations flee. Just as caterpillar and locust strip the fields and vines, so the fallen army of Assyria will be stripped. Though the Lord is very great and lives in heaven, he will make Jerusalem his home of justice and righteousness. So we see out of these two, there's a difference between how they begin. But chapter 33 starts in verse 1 with a woe. And who is the woe against and why? Well, it depends on the version you read. So it's against, as the New Living says, against Assyria. But again, in the New King James and many of the other translations, it's against those who plunder, those who deal treacherously. And so we have to ask, why is it more than just Assyria? Why does the New Living break it down to Assyria, but the others leave it more general? And well, and the reason that I can come up with is it fits more than just Assyria. It fits the time of Israel when they were away in Babylon. It fits when Persia conquered Babylon and dealt with the Israelites. It fits when Greece conquered the world. So the old world powers all kind of fit this thing. They all dealt treacherously. They all plundered. Babylon especially plundered the treasury from Israel. The main reason they aim it at Assyria, because it fits so extremely perfectly. This is a very near-term fulfillment of the prophecy, because Sennacherib, when he invaded the land of Judah, Hezekiah paid him to go away. He literally took everything out of the temple, all the treasury out of the temple, the silver and gold, and if you can read about it in 2 Kings chapter 18. And Sennacherib took that treasure, and then he didn't leave. He didn't go away. He broke the promise and kept at trying to conquer Judah and Jerusalem. So he broke his vow. He was treacherous. He plundered the town, and he was treacherous. And so that leads us into verse 2 and 3. What's significant about verses 2 and 3? What's different? Well, what's different is the heart of Israel has changed. The heart of Judah has changed. They are now looking to the Lord to be their help, to be their comfort, to be their provider and protector. So you can see that heart change in those verses. And now they're willing to do that. The promise of verse 4 comes in. It says, God will return the treasure that's taken from you. The plunder that happens, it's going to be given back. And we see that in 2 Kings chapter 19, when 185,000 of the Assyrian army are killed in one night. And Judah goes out of Jerusalem and plunders the bodies and literally recoup much of what, if not all of what Assyria had taken out of the treasury of Judah. We also see a later fulfillment when Cyrus, who had conquered Babylon as the king of Persia, he sent the Israelites back to Jerusalem. And what did he do? He sent them back with the treasure from the temple that Babylon had taken. So we get to see both fulfillments, a little bit near and a little bit farther down the road fulfillment. In verse 5 and 6, we see the Lord is exalted. We've seen this in the past, that really only he is worthy of being exalted. The kings tried to exalt themselves, but only the Lord, is worthy of being exalted. And again, the promise to fill Jerusalem with justice and righteousness. This is when the Messiah rules ultimately. We see partial fulfillments in Hezekiah and some of the other good kings of Judah. But ultimately, it's only fulfilled when the Messiah rules and reigns in Jerusalem. And we go to verses 7 to 13. What does the verses 7 to 9 describe? Well, what they describe is a hopelessness amongst the people. They see the war is coming. Sennacherib has taken their treasure and then turned around and not left the country and renewed the attack against Jerusalem. So war is coming. There's no way to avoid it. The ambassadors, all the diplomats, everybody, all those paths have stopped. They've ended. And there is no peaceful solution. It's going to be war, and it's going to be bloody. And, so there's that hopeless. It's desolation outside, and there's no relief. And so there's a hopelessness in the people. But we see hope in verses 10 to 13. And we see hope because the Lord says, I am here. He says, I will exalt. I will act. There is time that you don't have to wait any longer. I am here and I will take action. I will be exalted. You will be humbled. And he's talking to, you will be humbled. He's talking to Assyria. He's talking to the other nations later on. But in this context, he's talking to Assyria and he's talking to Jerusalem. And then he goes, and whether you're near or far. So the acts of the Lord, we saw earlier when the children of Israel marched into the land and they talked to, the spies went to Rahab, and Rahab goes, we're all afraid. We know what the Lord did in Egypt for you. So the works of the Lord have been known down through history, and it's just like now. The works of the Lord are known near and far. And he says, you're going to acknowledge those works. You're going to understand those works and give me the credit that is due. And because of that, we go into verses 14 to 16. And I just love these three verses. You know, it starts off with who's afraid and why are they afraid? And we see that the sinner's afraid. Why is the sinner afraid? Well, because the sinner is now facing a holy, pure, righteous God. And he recognizes that God is a consuming fire. And he sees that God's judgment is eternal. And he can't stand in front of him. He's terrified. He's frightened. And he knows that he has no business being in front of our holy and righteous God. Well, who is not afraid? And why aren't they afraid? Well, those that are righteous are not afraid. They trust God. They hate oppression. They hate evil. They hate the bribes. They hate the violence, it says. You know, but they're not afraid because they trust God to provide for them. And it says God will provide literally all the essentials, the food, the water, and the safety that they've been longing for, you know. So they're not afraid because the Lord is on their side. In verses 17 to 24, we see, you know, it starts off that they see the king in his beauty. And what does that mean to those in Judah? Well, it means that the righteous who have been looking and trusting God and looking for him finally get to see the Messiah, the king, in all his beauty and all his splendor, ruling and reigning in Jerusalem. And they were looking forward to that. You know, they're not looking, you know, there's a difference between seeing the king in his court and in his throne room and seeing the king on the battlefield. They got to see the king in his beauty. They were looking forward to seeing the king in his beauty, having conquered the world, the nations, and ruling and reigning. Now, what does it mean for Christians today? Well, we're looking for the Messiah too. We know the Messiah has come once and he's coming again. Jesus Christ is coming back for us. And we're looking for that time also when he rules and reigns. And we get to see him in his splendor, and we get to enjoy the present, being in his presence. And we've been looking forward to that as believers. So we're both looking for the opportunity to see the king in his beauty. And we get to verse 18, it says, you're going to meditate on terror. And you know, and it could be all the terrible works that have been going on. You're meditating on what the bad is. But probably it mostly means that those who are ungodly, the unrighteous, they're really meditating on the terror of being in God's presence. You know, it's terrifying for a believer even to be in God's presence, but we know he loves us. We have the assurance of his love and of his grace and mercy. We recognize that terror, but we're in the presence of someone who loves us. The ungodly, they are in the presence of a pure and holy and righteous God. We were talking a couple weeks ago, and Phil mentioned the example from The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and the children are talking to the beavers about Aslan, who's coming. He's a lion, he's great, and he's terrific and terrible. And the kids are saying, is he safe? No, he's not safe. He's a lion, but he's the king. He's good and he's righteous. And that's the metaphor that we get here in verse 18. We see a righteous king ruling and reigning. In verse 19 is probably the near-term promise that Judah would not have to listen to the Assyrian tongue probably ever again, running through the town and city of Jerusalem. But we get two metaphors in the last 5 verses, verses 20 to 24. And the two metaphors, the first is Jerusalem is likened to a tent, a permanent tent. Now, really, how we're talking about God's protection, and he's using a tent? Well, the tabernacle was a tent. The children of Israel picked up and carried the tabernacle through the wilderness for 40 years. Now they finally had a temple. But God's saying, I'm going to make that tabernacle, that tent, permanent. The stakes will hold in the ground. The ropes will not be loosened. The tent will be secure. You will be protected from all the elements and from any who want to get in. And then he gives the metaphor of the broad river. And that, we don't fully understand how much water can be a protection when it surrounds a city, but we know from history they put moats around castles, that oceans protected nations, rivers, long, wide rivers would protect cities. And here he's saying, you are going to have the protection of a wide, still river where no enemy ships, no galley pulled by oars, or no sailing ship can come into that river and attack you. They just won't be there. They won't be able to get in. The sailing ships won't be able to raise their sails, and the galleys won't be able to get in. They will be protected. And the rivers are also a means of protecting life and watering and fertilizing the farmland, and that providing for life. So God is providing these things, and it comes down to, his protection, because they're trusting in him again. He is their judge. He is their lawgiver. They recognize him as their king. He's providing salvation to them. And so you see the continuation of the blessings of their changed hearts when they're trusting God. All these things, God's protection and his safety and security and salvation are given to them. And we see in verse 23 and 24 also that the plunder is divided. Well, who's the plunder? God has taken the plunder from all the nations, and now he's giving it to the people. And he's giving it to those who are weak, those who are lame. Those who had been prey are now getting the benefits of the plunder. And God is providing for them. And he ends by saying, he forgives their iniquities. He forgives their sins. So when they're trusting him and relying on him and looking to him, he forgives their sins. We see the near-term fulfillment in Hezekiah. We see a longer-term fulfillment in Babylon as the children of Israel return to the nation. We see that a bit today as all of us who are believers in Jesus Christ, we put our trust in God. But the long-term, the ultimate fulfillment of this chapter, again, comes into the millennial kingdom, the rule of Jesus Christ as the Messiah when he comes back to rule and reign in Jerusalem and be the king of Israel. This chapter 33 continues the lessons of trust. Who do you trust? Are you trusting yourself? Are you trusting other nations, other peoples? Or are you trusting God? And God continues to show that only he is trustworthy. Only he has the authority and the power to provide that protection and bring salvation for all. And when he does, when we trust him, we get blessings beyond our measure. That we as the prey get to take part in the plunder. And everything taken from us is given back. And that's what he's telling Israel and telling Judah. And I think it still gives us today that measure of security that he will provide for us and give back to us. So I hope you enjoyed this lesson this week in Isaiah chapter 33. Next week, join us again as we look at Isaiah chapter 34. Thank you so much, and be praying for all those who are struggling during this time of quarantine and health issues in this pandemic.